The problem with Eve in Paradise Lost is this. Milton tells us multiple times throughout the poem, using multiple speakers, that Eve is inferior to Adam. There's all these arguments about men being more rational than women. It's pretty obnoxious, actually. So Milton's Eve makes us mad, or maybe just Milton makes us mad. But maybe not everything is as it seems. Maybe Milton is baiting us into reconsidering our assumptions about worth and value. Or I don't know, maybe he's just a misogynist. So first, broadly speaking, we're going to look at those moments in the poem that emphasize Eve's inferiority, and then we're going to look at these other moments that seem to highlight her equality or even her superiority. The key thing we need to consider, and you need to think about this when reading Paradise Lost, is does Milton's representation of Eve ultimately jeopardize his stated ambition to justify the ways of God to men? So let's look at a few of these moments where Eve's supposed inferiority is emphasized. So our first example, when Eve talks about her creation in Book 4 of Paradise Lost, her first appearance in the world is characterized by vanity. She stares at a reflection of herself in the water and is enraptured. It's kind of a Narcissus image, right? A narcissistic image. It's an image of self-love. In fact, when Eve meets Adam, she actually thinks, actually, I'm way better looking than that guy is. I'd rather spend time looking at my reflection. And she has to be, this is a very ambiguous line, she has to be gently seized by Adam. Thy gentle hand seized mine, we're told. How do you gently seize something? Also, throughout the poem, Eve is regularly praised for her submissiveness and her obedience. She says to Adam in Book 4, God is thy law, thou mine. To know no more is woman's happiest knowledge. Ugh. In Book 6, when Raphael is telling Adam to beware of Satan, he says, warn thy weaker. The implication seems to be that Eve is weaker than Adam and Adam needs to look out for her. And after the fall, when God shows up in the garden and Adam tries to blame everything on Eve, and God says, God set thee above her, made of thee, and for thee whose perfection far excelled hers in all real dignity. There is a truck outside, which is beeping, and it is driving me crazy. So every time I go to talk, I get the beep, beep, beep. So lots of indications that Adam is superior to Eve. But here is where it gets complicated. In that same passage after the fall in Book 10, God argues that Eve was Adam's equal, not his inferior or his superior, but his equal. And we learn in Book 8 about the story of Adam's creation. When Adam asked God for a companion, for someone to live with, he specifically requests an equal. The whole thing is that Adam doesn't want to live in the garden by himself with a bunch of animals. And also all the way back in Book 3, when God is explaining to the son, so God is kind of explaining to himself what's going to happen in the poem, Godsplaining. God says to God that humanity was sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. And when you read closely, there may be indications that Eve is actually smarter than Adam. For example, when Raphael comes down to talk to them, tell them about the war in heaven, at the beginning of Book 8, Eve gets bored and decides she's going to go do something else. She's going to go tend to the garden. And there's sort of this cringy passage where it says that Eve would actually rather hear the news secondhand from Adam, because then they can hug and kiss while he tells her what she needs to know. And so you read that and you kind of think, here we go again. Okay, so the men are going to talk and the woman is going to go busy herself with flowers. But in that same conversation, immediately after Eve leaves, Adam starts asking Raphael about kind of theoretical physics and the universe, astronomy. He's got all these questions about space and creation. And Raphael cautions him not to know at large of things remote from use, obscure and subtle, but to know that which before us lies in daily life is the prime wisdom. Therefore, from this high pitch, let us descend a lower flight and speak of things at hand useful. Things at hand. This truck is killing me. It will not go away. So Raphael says, let's stop talking about this stuff and really concern yourself with day-to-day life, which is what Eve's doing. She didn't need the angel to teach her that. Similarly, in Book 10, when God arrives and says, hey, what's going on, everybody? And Adam has this long speech, right, where he says, well, yeah, man, you know what? The woman that you made me, and I had no reason to suspect she was imperfect because she seemed so good. And again, you gave her to me. Well, she gave me the fruit and I ate it. So Adam blames everyone but himself. And he's got this long speech where he plays the victim and he excuses himself from wrongdoing. God has very little patience for this. And then he turns to Eve and says, Eve, what do you have to say for yourself? And Eve, very concise, says, the serpent me beguiled, and I did eat. And the poet praises her for not being loquacious, which means like a windbag. And by implication, she's not doing what Adam just did. So we are told throughout Paradise Lost that Eve is inferior. But when we read a little more closely, when we read carefully, that may not be the case. Importantly, this is a poem where humanity falls because they fail to interpret things correctly. They don't see things as they actually are. So it's possible that Milton is testing us, baiting us into adopting a superficial or surface level reading. When we look at the surface, things look one way. When we look a little more closely, something else appears to be true. So I don't think I can completely exonerate Milton here. So I don't think I can make the case that Milton's poem is not sexist, or that Milton is not in any way sexist. Paradise Lost seems too invested in women's subordination and the virtue of womanly obedience. I think Milton was probably a man of his time, and so he subscribed to some conception of the patriarchal order. It's hard to imagine he would not have believed in any kind of gender hierarchy. He probably would have. This truck. But here's the really interesting thing, and something I think we can learn, really valuable from Milton. He gives us a presentation in this poem of unequal equals. These two people they must be, if this punishment is to be just, they must be equals. And if they are equals, then whatever Eve's seeming deficiencies are, they must be of little consequence. Milton, I think, would argue that... we need this... How's that? Hey gang, I'm editing this video that you're watching right now, and I don't think I explained this clearly enough. I wrote it all down. So the issue is this. We assume that equality is about attributes. If Adam is not as beautiful as Eve, then they're unequal. Or maybe more significantly, is if Eve is not as rational as Adam, then they must be unequal. But I think what Milton wants us to recognize is that these attributes by which we typically measure human value are less significant than we think. So we assume human equality rests on these attributes, that we must be at the same level or else we're not equal. If we're not at the same level, we can't be equal. That's what we think. But first, we're never on the same level as almost anyone. We're just not identical in that way, right? And second, I think what Milton really wants us to recognize is that our equality does not rest on these attributes. That people can be smarter than each other, they can be more powerful than each other, stronger, more clever, and yet still be equal. And I think what he wants us to recognize is that the actual measure of our equality, at least for Milton, is our capacity for goodness. Insofar as we can do that, insofar as we have this capacity to do what's right, we are the same. And here Satan matters, right? Because Satan is extraordinary, right? He's a great speaker and warrior, and he's amazing, but he's bad. So his greatness does not translate to goodness. So the key thing I think Milton wants us to recognize is that our equality is not based on our abilities. Our equality seems to be rooted in our capacity to be faithful. This may not be satisfying, may not, but I think that's what he's saying. There's a line in book 5 that I love. Raphael says, "To love or not, in this we stand or fall. Can I love the person driving this truck?" That is my personal challenge. To love or not, on this we stand or fall. Not to get too sentimental on you, but the real mark of our equality might be our capacity to love. My name is Dr. Moore. I teach great books at St. Thomas University. If you enjoyed this video, you can check out another one over here. Thanks very much. Talk to you soon.